ricksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham. A Trump-backed VA bill making it easier to fire Veterans Administration workers is being spun by the GOP as real accountability for the Veterans Administration. Already passed by the House, the VA Accountability First Act of 2017 undermines and weakens collective bargaining for VA workers, stripping them of real due process grievance procedures. Jackie Simon is Policy Director for the American Federation of Government Employees.
All many Democrats and Republicans care about is make it easy to fire. Fire, fire, fire. That's what it's all about. We're hoping that the firing of James Comey for obviously political reasons, to cover up wrongdoing or alleged wrongdoing, reminds people that that kind of thing goes on at much lower levels as well. If you don't have civil service protections, if you don't have the protection of a union contract.
The VA bill is being spun as a way to better protect military veterans, but the not-so-hidden extra agenda in this bill is an attack on VA workers and their due process grievance rights when it comes to firing or other workplace discipline.
The House firing bill for VA workers took away collective bargaining rights altogether. It explicitly prohibited anybody's ability to use the grievance and arbitration provisions of their collective bargaining agreement to appeal a demotion, a suspension, a firing. That came through the administration.
AFGE President David Cox Sr. is testifying before Congress Wednesday on what his union is calling the VA firing bill.
Let's be smart on crime, because just being tough on crime isn't always the right decision.
Former Utah U.S. Attorney Brett Tolman says new orders from Trump's Attorney General Jeff Sessions telling federal prosecutors to seek the harshest possible charges ignores decades of criminal justice learning in the U.S. Among the lessons learned that apparently have escaped Sessions is that warehousing huge numbers of people in prison for long, harsh sentences isn't the most effective way of fighting crime. And Tolman says the Sessions order tightening the harsh sentence screws for federal crimes will increase the racial inequality in the U.S. criminal justice system.
While it affects all cross-sections of the United States, it has a deeper and a wider effect on our inner cities, in our poor, and in our minority communities. It ignores decades of learning that we've done on the issue. We have seen that you cannot prosecute and incarcerate our way out of the drug problem.
Brought to you by Union Active, your certified iOS and Android mobile app developer, offering high-quality, union-made mobile apps backed by a support team which upgrades your product to every new mobile operating system. Features, pricing, and examples are online at unionactive.com.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. And yes, we still sort of have something of a country left. Wow. I got to be honest. I'm a lot of things you think of Donald Trump, serial leaker. really hadn't thought of it, especially when you look at the entire campaign season and then every second since he's been in the Oval Office with this obsession at finding the leaker. Evidently, we have found him, and he is him. And, there are reports coming out of the White House that there was screaming and there was yelling, and, the Spice Boy and Steve Bannon and Sarah Huckabee Sanders were, just at each other's throats along with the communications director and all of this anger. And look, those are people who should be screaming. They should be running, screaming from the White House, because I don't know how you spin this stuff. I watched reports coming out, of career military people putting their entire military career on the line only to be thrown under the bus. You had McMaster coming out saying, nope, none of that. It's all fake. Only to have Trump say, I should be allowed to do it. Wow. What? Really? Are you kidding me? And the answer is yes. I mean, you go back to the campaign and you had, Trump just tweeting out almost daily something about crooked Hillary and her team, extremely careless in their handling of very sensitive, highly classified information, not fit. And you go, but you did it on purpose and now saying you can? Wow. Again, you go back and now understand, Donald also had a tweet fit over Edward Snowden, who had leaked some information, a bunch of information. But you had Trump calling him a traitor and he should be executed. So here's the question. Again, coming back to, because, I've lived in this country my whole life, and it's been a number of years. I remember when the Russians were our enemy, and I don't ever remember a moment where we were hand in hand. We worked together on things, as you should, but I don't remember when they were an ally and you were throwing actual allies under the bus. I don't remember this period in history, and maybe this is the brave new authoritarian world that we're moving into. Don't know. Hope not. But how do you have a meeting with Russian spies, allowing the Russian media in and not the American media, unless you're doing some really dumb stuff? And I got to be honest, I'm shocked at the deafening silence from the Republican Party. Now, remember, you had Paul Ryan back in July saying Hillary Clinton should not be given national security briefings in that she's a loose cannon with extraordinarily bad judgment and instincts. You had Reince Priebus the day before that back in July. Individuals who are extremely careless with classified information should be denied further access to such information. Those who have handled classified info have had their security clearances revoked, lost their jobs, faced fines, and even been sent to prison. And this is kind of where the lock her up thing came from. Michael Flynn, lock her up, all of this. Is it just me? Or where are these people? Now, what's interesting to me now is you've got the Israeli newspaper, the Jewish Chronicle, reporting that Israeli intelligence officials have been told by American intelligence officials to not share any information with the Trump administration. Nothing. And now you remember during the campaign, there were a bunch of, former CIA, former intelligence, experts saying there's going to be a time where you can't tell the president anything because he won't shut up. Because understand, this is how I see what happened. Donald needs to feel like he's the big guy in the room, and he's going to share things, and we're going to bond. So he gives away highly classified information. Now, did he give the exact names of the sources? No, but from what I understand, it's not very hard. Maybe for the Trump administration, it's hard to follow a simple roadmap. But for people who actually do this kind of stuff, I'm told it's not really that difficult. So the question then comes back to, if you had a president and an entire party saying that when it was the woman, we should lock her up and we should take her security clearance away and she's unfit for office. Now you have them in charge. What is the proper punishment? Understand, we have just screwed up the world. The balance of the geopolitical balance is really off kilter, because now you've got our friends, our allies, and Israel is one of our allies. When they're looking at us sideways, when they're looking at us with a jaundiced eye going, whoa, we can't give them anything because they're going to give it to the Russians. And if you're Israel going, if the Russians get it, they're going to give it to the Iranians, and that's going to come back on us. We can't tell them anything. We got to go it alone. That is exactly what the Russians and the Iranians want. Mission accomplished. Break out the Bush banner, get the socks for the drawers, all of that stuff. And there's part of me that goes, and look, I'm just a dumb truck driver. I see this roadmap very clearly. It's simple. Why is it that the guy that has been elected by negative 3 million votes, why doesn't he get it? Why aren't all the smart people getting it? Or is that what they were arguing about in the back room, going, are you kidding me? I got to go back out and make you know what up again? I've got to lie through my teeth again? Susan Collins, it's pretty funny. Susan Collins said, can't we just have one day without a crisis? Can't we have just one day without something going on? And as I tweeted out yesterday, yeah, we can. When you impeach this guy, him, Pence, and virtually everybody everybody who's on the Republican dole. You've got Republican money, on the Russian dole. You get Russian money, you go. In fact, we should take up a collection and ship them over. If you love Russia so much, we'll help you get there. If you like that kind of totalitarian, authoritarian regime, if you like an oligarchy running your country, if you want that kind of concentration of power, there's a place for you to do that. Not here. And this is one of those moments in history where this is a very defining moment, because this ain't going away. The Comey thing sealed that the Russian investigation is going to happen. One way or another, going to happen. And it's going to have to be done with an independent prosecutor. Going to have to happen. And you look at all of this insanity. Now, you've got the Trump people saying there's nothing there. There's no there. But you just fired Comey, who would have probably found nothing in your favor. And now you've got this Russian thing. It just seems really cozy. To where, I got to be honest, I'd love to hear from some Trump supporters on, you still on the train? You still on board? I know Laura Ingraham last night, tweeted out that this is all fake news. She talked with somebody who was there and it was all fake. Except you had McMaster saying, well, he did say some things. He just didn't give out sources or methods. He did give out the information, though. And then you've got and this is the part that, again, it's just kind of mind-blowing. You've got the Russian Foreign Ministry. The spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova, she said today that basically anything coming out of U.S. news is fake. She wrote on her Facebook page another fake story. She said, guys, you have been reading too many American newspapers again. Don't read them. You can use them in various ways, but don't read them. Recently, it's not only harmful, but also dangerous. Yeah, when you start saying that the emperor has no clothes, it's dangerous for those in power and control. And I'm telling you, now is the time we stay active, engaged. Because, look, the fire hose of scandal is not going to stop. And you've got to weed through the nonsense, weed through the distraction, and burrow in on what's really important. And when we come back, I'm going to talk a little bit about what our Attorney General, the guy who's the head of the Department of Injustice, what he's pursuing. And, another one of those issues that I think people want taken care of. But, we've got a president running around, leaking secrets. Very, very strange. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
All of my life I have searched for clarity. I have wrestled with two paths buried deep inside of me. I lost some rounds, been knocked around, felt my share of defeat. Yet somehow I've always managed to get back on my feet.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1979. That was the day we lost one of the giants of the U.S. labor movement, A. Philip Randolph. A. Philip Randolph spent his life working for black workers and the cause of labor. He organized the first national black union to be recognized by the American Federation of Labor, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. The fight for union recognition took 12 years. And the Porters signed their first contract in 1937. Randolph went on to lead the effort to desegregate war industries and armed services during and after World War II. He was one of the leading organizers of the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, one of the most memorable actions of the Civil Rights Movement. He also worked tirelessly to break down discrimination within the labor movement. He was elected the first black vice president of the AFL-CIO in 1955. Randolph's dedication to the cause of labor was summed up when he said, quote, "The essence of trade unionism is social uplift. The labor movement has been the haven for the dispossessed, the despised, the neglected, the downtrodden, the poor." But Randolph also consistently declared that no movement for social justice can be complete unless it is also inclusive. While organizing for the desegregation of the war industries during World War II, Phillips argued, quote, "Equality is the heart and essence of democracy, freedom and justice, equality of opportunity in industry, in labor unions, schools and colleges, government, politics, and before the law. There must be no dual standard of justice, no dual rights, privileges, duties, or responsibilities of citizenship. No dual forms of freedom." Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
Exposing GOP hypocrisy. The Rick Smith Show.
The children. Yes, we love the children, which is why I think it's interesting, 3 a.m. in North Carolina. The Senate Republicans there said, hey, we got to deal with the opioid addiction crisis. And how are we going to pay for it? Well, we're going to steal it from the kids. We're going to defund the education programs that are going to maybe help people stay off of drugs, and we're going to shift it over. Again, it's just one of those moments where you go, what exactly is wrong with the Republican Party? Now, you may remember yesterday we talked about Attorney General Jeff Sessions, the head of the Department of Injustice, who had issued a memo on Friday saying we're making the war on drugs great again. Now, understand, this is the same guy who's going to bring us back the for-profit private prison industry. So, double win. War on drugs, more people to lock up, private prisons, more profit for the 1%. Good stuff. Now, you, the people, well, don't give a rat's behind about you. I'm here to talk a little bit about the crisis that is our opioid epidemic and really the response that we're getting out of the Trump administration and Republicans across the country. I've asked Drew Gibson to come talk with us. He's the founder and managing editor over at VirallySuppressed.com. Drew, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
So here we've got the Department of Injustice saying we're going back. We're going to just ramp up that war on drugs.
Yeah, they're playing back the old hits again. It's really astonishing that you had Donald Trump on the campaign trail essentially come out and say that I am the one that's going to fix the opioid epidemic. And his main response has been, I'm going to resuscitate the war on drugs and lock up all the people that are actually suffering from this horrible epidemic.
Well, I mean, to be honest, Drew, isn't that the authoritarian way of doing things? I mean, you could go the way of Duarte in the Philippines and just execute people who are on drugs.
I mean, honestly, that is sort of has historically been very anti-drug user. He actually said in a hearing, I believe last year or the year before, that people who smoke marijuana are not good people. He is not someone that you want on your side if you are trying to actually help and rehabilitate people who have struggled with addiction. And really all you're going to see in the Trump administration is a filling back up of all of the cells that were emptied under Obama.
So let me ask you this. I mean, because at the end of it, I've been saying for a while now, because we're talking about the opioid addiction crisis. Now it's a crisis. Now it's a huge problem because it's hit white America. It's hit suburban America. As we were before, it was just junkies in the inner cities, with heroin and all of that. Will this change with the American psyche that it has hit the suburbs and maybe hold someone like Trump and Sessions accountable?
It's definitely changed at the state level, and especially in the GOP. You see people like Rob Portman, Shelley Moore Capito in West Virginia, who are very concerned about the opioid epidemic and are fighting for actually a lot of fairly decent reform. And it's one of the few areas where there's bipartisan support, which is why it was so disappointing to see the Sessions DOJ come out with this guidance, because we were, after 40 plus years of the war on drugs, we were finally coming out of the fog, and now Trump is dragging us right back into it.
Yeah, I mean, again, it just seems like every bad idea that the Republicans have had over the years is, well, we're making those great again.
That's basically the idea behind the Trump administration drug policy. And what's really terrifying is the fact that when you take into account the huge cuts that are happening to Medicaid, you're looking at, just through Medicaid expansion alone, 1.3 million people in America who gained access to drug and mental health coverage could have that just ripped away. And it's going to be the low-income Americans who are the ones that suffer the most, as it always is. So, basically every single one of the Trump administration's health policies and justice policies are detrimental to the future of anyone who is addicted to opioids or has a loved one that is.
Let me ask you this, Drew, as someone who had, you have a background working at the Office of National Drug Control Policy. Where should we be going if this isn't right? Because look, there are some who believe, the tough love mentality, that the only way we're going to get through to some people is you've got to lock them up, or harsh consequences, good beatings in public square, things like that. What direction should we be going?
I mean, the science is pretty clear on where we should go when it comes to opioid addiction. Medication-assisted treatment, the use of Suboxone and even methadone, that is the most effective way to treat opioid addiction. And the Office of National Drug Control Policy under Michael Botticelli And the Surgeon General's office under Vivek Murthy, who just was relieved of his duties by President Trump, were very clear in that. And if we devote the resources that are needed towards both education and treatment, we definitely can address the crisis. It's just the Trump administration is unwilling to acknowledge the reality of the situation and wants to promote policies that are punitive rather than, helpful.
Let me ask you this, again, with your background, who are the people who are addicted? Because, I've said, look, I know a couple people over the years who, got hurt on the job, ended up getting, this painkiller, the next painkiller, and on down the line until eventually being cut off. Who are the people that we're talking about?
Look around your family. Look around your job. Drug addiction is an equal opportunity offender. And part of the reason why, as you mentioned earlier, it's getting more press now and more sympathetic press is because it's now become a more white and sort of upper middle class affliction in a lot of ways. But by the same token, that doesn't mean that it doesn't affect every single segment of the population. So that really the difference between how we treat addiction isn't so much based on sort of race or severity, but on class. If you have the money, you can get the treatment. If you have the right insurance, you can get the treatment. If you don't, you're SOL.
Yeah. Or on the other side of that is if you have the right money and the right connections, you can stay out of jail and get treatment.
Yeah, but fortunately, there are a lot of local police departments that are sort of wising up to the fact that they can't arrest themselves out of this problem. A great example of this is the Gloucester Police Department in Gloucester, Mass. Has basically put a order out that says we will not arrest anyone that comes to a police station saying they need help. If you are addicted to drugs, doesn't matter what you have on you, what your record is, if you come to them and say, I need help, they will get you help. And the response has been amazing. They've had a great response to getting people into treatment. So, the more police departments that can realize that they're not going to fill cells to end this epidemic, the better off we are. But that's the exact opposite tack that Sessions of the Trump administration are taking.
Right. So if I'm getting you right, the idea of, locking people up in the Arizona sun, for instance, wearing pink underwear, sleeping in tents, that's really not going to help.
The Arpaio model really hasn't panned out, no.
Because there's a lot of people, especially Trump supporters, who believe that that's the way we should be going. And there are some, and I've talked to a number of people who think that, this kind of fatherly figure and this kind of, the stick mentality works.
Yeah, and the sad thing is that the people that are going to be hurt most by Trump's policies are Trump voters. The folks that are going to be most impacted by the loss of Medicaid funds and the loss of rural hospitals and all of these sort of resuscitation of the war on drugs are going to be people of color in the cities and rural, poor white Americans.
Right.
And so these are people that voted for Trump in a lot of ways, hoping that he would get rid of the opioid epidemic, that he would address it. And they basically voted to put themselves in a horrible position. So I think there's a huge opportunity for Democratic and independent politicians to essentially reach out to folks who might have voted Trump or who are somehow not enamored with the Democratic Party and basically say, look, we are an empathetic ear, and we're going to give you help. This isn't a matter of tough love. This is a matter of simply love. And anyone who tells you can lock away this disease is frankly just lying.
So there are those people who just quit it cold turkey. Because we hear that. You got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, Drew.
All of the scientific evidence says that, especially with opioid addiction and the way that it affects the brain, going cold turkey is a very, very dangerous proposition. Specifically because a lot of times when people overdose and die, it's because they overdose on their first time back out when they think that they had the same tolerance they used to. So it's a different beast than, say, alcoholism, where someone goes back out after being sober for a couple months and they just they go on a blackout, get a bender, and then maybe they go back into treatment. With substance abuse, with opioids, it's much more deadly. Yeah. So we have to treat it like that.
It's horrible, horrible stuff. And, I've heard just absolute horror stories. A second ago, you brought up an interesting point, though. I mean, because I go back to the Republicans' health care, their repeal plan and their replacement, the horrible health care act of theirs. And that in itself is a major attack on this crisis because it's going to take that avenue to get treatment away.
Yeah, the Republican AHCA, we don't have the new Congressional Budget Office score for the revised, even more hideous bill. That's supposed to come out, I believe, on the 23rd. But the first one would have taken $880 million out of the healthcare system. And as I mentioned earlier, 1.3 million people who had access to opioid treatment and mental health care through Medicaid expansion would just lose it. And so I think that's another place where Democrats and independents can leverage moderate Republicans to basically say, look, we need to work together to help your own constituents. And I think at a certain level, people like Portman and Moore Capito and Toomey might be responsive to that argument. So it's something to look at.
Yeah. Are there any estimates, based on the numbers that you've thrown out of how many of those people die because of lack of treatment and basically being left on their own? Any estimates?
I don't know estimates in terms of people who die as a direct result of not getting treatment. I do know that at a high-end estimate, roughly 10% of people that need drug and alcohol treatment get it. So 1 in 10 is not a great ratio.
No, that's not. And the question then becomes is, because, as I was asking when the AHCA estimates came out of anywhere between 29 and 55,000 people will die next year because of lack of access. I wonder, what if we had a terrorist attack that killed 29,000 people? How would we react? Yet we've got a Republican Party who's basically sentencing that many people to death by taking health care away from them and in the opioid addiction arena, taking treatment away.
I think the general public has been pretty clear on the fact that they really do not like the AHCA. I believe 17% supported the original bill, which isn't exactly a huge groundswell of support. And people are realizing slowly but surely that even if they don't love the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, if they don't love Obamacare, it's still much, much better than anything they got before or will be getting with the AHCA. And so if you want single payer, the best way to go about it is to start from a better position and move there. The idea that somehow going back to the HCA will help us get single payer, I think, is a very dangerous proposition that will end up in people dying.
Yeah, and just plain dumb. Last question I've got for you, Drew. What do we do? I mean, look, nobody wants to see someone die from an addiction. We want people to get treatment. We want families to be whole. What do we do? Where do we go?
Right now, you fight like hell to make sure that the AHCA does not become law. Groups like Families USA do amazing work in terms of advocacy, trying to get them to stop. Call your congressman or congresswoman. Protest. Do whatever you can, because that is going to be the most immediate impact on people who are living with opioid addiction. If the AHCA becomes law, the amount of suffering that will be inflicted on that population will be incalculable. So really just get out, make your voice heard, show up at town hall meetings, participate in Indivisible, whatever it is you can do, get out there, pound pavement, and try and stop this horrible bill, because if it goes through, it will not be pretty.
It's terrible stuff all around. Drew, I appreciate you taking some time. Great talking to you again.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
Always good. Drew Gibson. You want to check out his website, virallysuppressed.com. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com of how you can check out the work that he does there. Quick break. Right back. 1-888-520-RICK. 1-888-520-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show. We're working people around the talk.
I see them blue for me and you, and I say to myself,
yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labor News Update by Mark Boulanger. As preparations for a meeting of labor ministers from the G20 group of countries is underway, the international labor movement has released a global poll showing that working people are increasingly worried about economic globalization. Radio Labor's senior correspondent C. Marie Ainsborough reports.
More than 70% of working people are worried that they will lose their job as globalization increases. That is one of the worrisome findings of a new poll commissioned by the International Trade Union Confederation. The poll covers 16 countries representing more than 50% of the world population. It shows that not only are 73% of workers concerned about their job security, but 80% report that they have falling or stagnated wages. About 40% have either been unemployed in the past year or have seen their working hours reduced. 50% don't have enough money for basic essentials, or they are just barely getting by. Meanwhile, there's a broad consensus about what should be done. 71% of the people surveyed said governments should be working towards a pay increase for workers. 77% said governments should do more to make sure companies pay their fair share of taxes. And more than 70% want their governments to adopt new rules for multinational corporations to end the abuse of workers in their supply chains. ITUC General Secretary Sharon Burrow told the media that the rules of the global economy have been distorted to put the interests of the richest 1% and corporations ahead of working people. This power imbalance, she said, is driving mistrust in governments. The poll results will be presented to the G20 labor ministers at their conference in Germany, May 18th to 19th. This is C. Marie Ainsborough reporting for Radio Labor.
Under pressure by labor unions, NGOs, athletes organizations, and other civil society groups, the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, has agreed to incorporate respect for international human rights in the contract signed by host cities of the Olympic Games. The requirement will come into force for the 2024 Olympics to be hosted by either Paris or Los Angeles. I talked to Brendan Schwab about the new IOC rule concerning human rights. Mr. Schwab is the head of Uni World Athletes. Uni is the global union for skills and services such as banking and retail trade. It represents some 20 million workers in 900 unions around the world. I asked Mr. Schwab why it was felt necessary to force the IOC to put respect for human rights in the contract signed by the Olympic host cities.
Well, unfortunately, in recent times, there's been a series of major human rights concerns associated with hosting the Olympic Games. In Rio, for example, the major concerns were connected with the crackdown on local civilians by police in order to maintain what we could politely describe as a secure environment, where we felt that local residents had their fundamental rights abused. There were concerns over the compulsory acquisition of property without due process and compensation. And if we go back a few more further years, say to Sochi, where there were problems with unpaid workers involved in the construction of the Olympic facilities, and even back to Beijing, where there was a crackdown on freedom of speech, we can see that the Olympic Games have struggled to live up to their mantra of sport being a force for good and sport being something which promotes the very best of humanity coming together.
What will be the effect of this contractual stipulation that Olympic host cities respect international human rights?
With the host city contract now being amended to incorporate an express reference to international human rights standards, including the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights, then we can expect that all host city governments and also host city actors such as the local organising committee will set in place the necessary capacity so that they can protect, respect and fulfil the fundamental human rights of everyone involved in the Olympic Games during the life cycle. And that life cycle begins with the awarding of the event and, of course, ends with the post-event legacy.
And that's it. International labor news you can use. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
To this day, I feel like there's a cloud, a pall over the whole country in a paranoid surreal sort of way. It's got nothing to do with the Democrats losing the election. It's got to do with the way one individual conducts himself. And that's, it's embarrassing. It's dangerous to our institutions and what we all stand for and what we expect the country to be. But for this individual, he's in a game show. And everything that happens begins and ends with him, not our people or our country. Every time he talks about those things, that's just a ruse. That's just disingenuous, cynical, and fake.
Play the game, play the game, play the game, play the game.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Greg Popovich there, coach of the San Antonio Spurs. And, Popovich has been one of those guys who's criticized Trump in the past. So before game one, that's what he had to say to the news media. And good on him. I mean, generally, coaches and athletes and people in sports stay away from politics, don't want to upset one side or the other. And it's one of the reasons I like Popovich. And I'm rooting for him to beat the Golden State Warriors, although I will be rooting against them when they play the Cavaliers. But that's my home team. You got to root for them. Be nice to see them get back-to-back. But here's the thing. This is one of those moments where at this point, everybody should be speaking out and saying that the emperor has no clothes. I love Andy Borowitz and the Borowitz Report. Had a great one come out today where he writes, 3 men alleged to be prominent Russian spies inexplicitly gained access to the Oval Office last week and held a high-level meeting there, according to reports. Eyewitnesses to the meeting said that 3 Russian agents spoke at length and shared sensitive intelligence material, at times laughing uproariously. After approximately an hour, the meeting broke up, 2 of the spies leaving the Oval Office and the 3rd remaining behind. News that agents of the Russian Federation had somehow eluded the Secret Service in order to hold a meeting in the Oval Office sent shockwaves through Washington on Monday evening. The fact that 3 well-known Russian agents were able to hold a meeting in the Oval Office suggests that something has seriously broken down. Harlan Dornson, a national security official who served in the Reagan and Bush administrations, said none of these 3 men should be anywhere near the White House. On Capitol Hill, House Speaker Paul Ryan called the meeting of 3 Russian spies at the White House a tempest in a teapot and much ado about nothing, before adding off microphone, I am screwed, so screwed. And the hope is, yes, I hope that is true. So your little bit of satire from Andy Borowitz. Now, here's the thing. With every bit of satire, there's truth. And the truth of the matter is you did have 2 Russian spies in the Oval Office with someone of questionable loyalty. And understand, you had the Russian media there as well. American media not allowed. So, I mean, just the optics of that and not thinking that through and then coming out and saying, oh, we were tricked. Really? This is what's running our foreign policy? Honestly, truthfully, at some point, help. That's the best thing I can come up with. And here's the scary part of it. The scary part of it is I'm predicting we're heading for major recession because everybody is now looking around going, uh-oh, chaos, trouble. In fact, according to the most recent numbers from the Commerce Department, new housing starts fell unexpectedly last month. 2nd straight month. People are going, uh-oh, trouble. Not good. Not good stuff at all. Curious your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Is it much ado about nothing? Is it just a tempest in the teapot? Are we making a big deal about the Donald giving out classified information? Or is there really there? And this is high crimes and misdemeanors. Curious your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back with Talk Media News. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
All of my life I've searched for clarity. I have wrestled with two paths buried deep inside of me. I lost some rounds, been knocked around, felt my share of defeat. Yet somehow I've always managed to get back on my feet.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1934. That was the day Minneapolis Teamsters walked off the job. It was an historic strike that coincided with the pivotal Toledo Autolite and West Coast waterfront strikes. Local Teamsters, many of whom later founded the Socialist Workers' Party, had been riding a wave of success, having organized the coal yards in February. Especially important was the development of the cruising picket squad. It became a standard in later CIO battles. That spring, union leaders were determined to organize all the truck drivers and warehouse workers in Minneapolis. By May, Local 574 had over 5,000 members. The trucking bosses refused to deal with the union, and so they walked. The flying pickets toured the city and shut down all trucking. Strikers enlisted the support of the unemployed councils. They also provided the structure for a women's auxiliary that produced important strike literature and bulletins, ran soup kitchens that fed thousands of strikers daily, fought scabs and police on the picket lines, and drove picket trucks. Historian Brian Palmer, author of Revolutionary Teamsters, the Minneapolis Trucker Strike of 1934, notes that strike leaders looked to the example of the Illinois Progressive Miners of America when it came to building the women's auxiliary. They too sought to make women an integral part of the strike, thus encroaching on the male world of waged work. Strike headquarters were established, and as Palmer describes, was a beehive of activity on the eve of the strike as union carpenters and plumbers installed stoves, sinks, and serving counters. Union electricians installed communication wiring. Donations of money, food, vehicles, and gas rolled in as the strike revved up. Local 574 was poised to make Minneapolis a union town. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
So a new NBC Wall Street Journal poll out. They took a moment to ask the American people whether they think we should have an independent investigation into what's going on with the Trump administration, the election, Russia, all of that, or if Congress should handle it. And well, I think predictably we know what the answer is, since Congress has an approval rating somewhere around herpes. 78% said they want an independent commissioner, special prosecutor. 15% said no, let Congress do it. You got to kind of wonder who the 15% still are, and well, who the leftovers were. Anyway, let's find out what's going on in Washington D.C. or Trump land. I've got Michael Esker, Talk Media News Service. Michael, thanks for taking time for us.
Okay, how you doing today?
So, how are things there in Trumplandia?
In the usual state of chaos. Well, I wouldn't say usual because it's even more so now. Just when you think he can't top himself, he does.
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing to me that, you've got Susan Collins going, can't we just have one day without crisis?
We thought that the Comey stuff was big news, but he topped that pretty fast. You would think with all of the talk that we have heard over months and months and months, all of our intelligence agencies saying, Russia tried to disrupt our democratic process. You would think that by the time Donald Trump had the Russian foreign minister and ambassador in his office, that he might have said to them, hey, all my intelligence agencies say you guys tried to rig our election. But he didn't. Instead, he leaks this stuff that is known as a code word, which is above top secret, and he's oblivious. If Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton had done such a thing, you would have the Republicans climbing the walls saying that these people are spies, they're conspirators. You don't hear that here about Donald Trump. You hear, what has this bozo done this time? We have come to expect that he is not equipped for the job. That's the big problem. We have a, I live in Baltimore, and Johns Hopkins University is here. There's a guy named Elliot Cohen, who's the director of Strategic Studies program there, and he's a former counselor at the State Department. He's got a piece in the new website of Atlantic Monthly. Can I read you just a couple sentences?
Certainly.
He writes, in the normal course of events, Donald Trump would never have been given a high-level security clearance because of his psychological profile and personal record, including his susceptibility to blackmail. If Trump has indeed compromised a source of information, as we're now learning from these stories in the New York Times and the Washington Post, it is not merely a betrayal of an ally's trust. It is an act that will jeopardize a whole range of relationships. After all, the director of the CIA cannot very well say, don't worry, we won't share that with the president. So now everybody, even our closest allies like the United Kingdom, would be well advised to be careful with what they share with us. That is a potential intelligence debacle for us. But the danger goes beyond that. If any foreign government harbored lingering illusions about the administration's ability to protect any information, including sensitive but non-intelligence matters like future foreign policy initiatives or military deployments, they no longer do. They will be even more apprehensive about sharing sensitive information.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Yeah, but here's the thing, Michael. I mean, this came up during the election, if you remember, where you did have intelligence experts and you know people who are out of these different agencies saying, "Look, I don't know that we can share anything with him because he's got loose lips. He's going to leak this stuff. It's going to happen." We knew this during the campaign.
Certain people didn't believe it. Look, he kept denigrating his own intelligence people. If you remember, I'm sure you do. You know, he was when all of his intelligence agencies were saying Russia was trying to disrupt our election, he denigrated the intelligence people. He even at one point said they were using Nazi tactics. You know, then he goes to the CIA the day after the inauguration, stands in front of the wall honoring those who have given their lives, and talks about how many times he's been on the cover of Time magazine. You know, this is a guy who sat with the Chinese president talking about the airstrikes on the Syrian airfield over dinner at Mar-a-Lago with civilians all around. It's a horror thing to imagine that foreign countries are leery about giving us information, sharing information with us, because they're afraid of what he might do with it. But his own intelligence people are afraid, particularly in the aftermath of the Comey firing.
Yeah.
None of them trust this guy, and why should they?
Well, I just talked about this a minute ago, that the Jewish Chronicle reported that Israeli intelligence has been warned by our intelligence not to share anything because the fear is that Trump will give it to the Russians and the Russians will give it to the Iranians and Israel's screwed. And just to highlight exactly what you said.
Well, and he's going there. He's going to Saudi Arabia and Israel and the Vatican and I think Belgium. Now, if you are the leaders of any of those countries, do you want to share information with him at this point?
No, I don't want to share tea with him. I mean, at this point, you don't even let him in the building.
He is so overmatched by the job, and then to send people like McMaster out, who previously had a sterling reputation. He's now the national security advisor, and in the aftermath of these stories about the meeting with the Russians, he comes out to the lawn of the White House yesterday and tells reporters, I was in the room, it didn't happen. Well, this depends on your definition of it. He said that no intelligence sources or methods were discussed, and Trump didn't disclose any military operations. Well, the problem is the stories in the Times and the Post didn't make those claims.
Right.
They reported that the president discussed the contents of the intelligence and that he did it in granular detail, and McMaster comes out, talks for about 45 seconds, literally, and then turns and walks away, refusing to take any questions. Where's his reputation now?
Yeah, I got to be honest. I look at someone like him who I have high respect for, and you just look at that. How do you look at yourself in the mirror knowing that this administration is going to throw you under the bus and that stellar career along with it?
Well, and he came out with this tweet today. Again, he did not deny what's been reported, and he tried to rationalize it. So McMaster trying to do a non-denial denial, or what he thought would pass for a denial, he's left hanging out there already. 24 hours less, 12 hours later.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just mind blowing, and it's no wonder that there are reports of Bannon and Spicer and Huckabee Sanders and the communications people having a just knockdown, drag out screaming fest behind closed doors.
Yeah, they're all upset. They're all kind of rolling their eyes. What's he going to do next? And no one knows. But there's rumors of a shakeup coming of his staff. Sean Spicer has been on that list. If Sean Spicer gets fired, the guy has probably got to heave a sigh of relief.
I would.
Do you want to get out there every day and be the front man for a con man? Whatever reputation he once had has long since been shot.
Wow. I mean, I got to be honest. If they fire Spicer, who takes it? I mean, who wants that job?
That's right. I mean, I guess Huckabee's daughter would want it, but I don't know why. I think they've all lost credibility. Of course, Kellyanne Conway lost her credibility long ago. She's been caught saying so many things that are not true, but she also has been one who has consistently denigrated the use of confidential informants. Where you don't know who actually said it. Anonymous sources.
Right.
The fact is, Kellyanne Conway is consistently an anonymous source. She's one of those people that she is secretly putting down. She doesn't want people to know that she's an anonymous source, but she is.
Yeah, we have really. I mean, you couldn't write a better spy novel, a more bizarre daytime soap opera than we're living through right now.
It is unlike anything that you and I have seen in our lifetimes.
And no matter I go back and I think of all of the wild accusations and the predictions I made during the campaign of how bad this administration would be, and I got to be honest, I was wrong. It's actually much worse.
Oh, absolutely. No one imagined from day one, arguing about the size of the Inauguration Day crowd. What childishness. And it has not changed since then. And all the things that he has tried to do, nothing has succeeded.
Now, let me ask you about one thing that he has tried to do. I understand the 3 judges on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals yesterday heard some testimony from one of Trump's lawyers. Any idea what's going on there?
Well, not specifically. I know that they're arguing the case, and that, of course, as you know, that 3 other judges have already turned down. When they started arguing this case, the judges were saying, well, why, how is this different from what you were saying during the campaign when you were calling it a Muslim ban? And, their response was, we're not calling it that anymore. And a judge said, really? Then why is it still called a Muslim ban on the White House website? At which time, they removed it within moments after the judge saying that. But essentially, it's the same thing. So whether it's going to be any more successful than the previous efforts, I don't know. But he hasn't gotten anything done yet, aside from Neil Gorsuch.
Yeah, and to me, that's enough. That's enough to change the complexity of this country for at least a couple of generations.
Absolutely, for decades to come.
Yeah, I mean, that's the most dangerous thing to me. And, at some point, let's say he's impeached, there's got to be a way to go back and undo all of the horrible things that the Republicans have gotten away with because of especially if we find the Russians were involved. There's got to be a way of going back on some of that.
His behavior has been so outrageous. When do these Republicans finally decide that the country means more to them than their party?
Yeah.
When do they realize history is going to be very unkind to them?
That is the million-dollar question. Michael, I appreciate the time, man. Always great talking with you.
All right, pal. Take care.
Our good friend Michael Olesker, Talk Media News. I mean, that really is the question. When do they wake up? When do their voices rise? Scary times. Quick break. Right back.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham. A Trump-backed VA bill making it easier to fire Veterans Administration workers is being spun by the GOP as real accountability for the Veterans Administration. Already passed by the House, the VA Accountability First Act of 2017 undermines and weakens collective bargaining for VA workers, stripping them of real due process grievance procedures. Jackie Simon is Policy Director for the American Federation of Government Employees.
All many Democrats and Republicans care about is make it easy to fire. Fire, fire, fire. That's what it's all about. We're hoping that the firing of James Comey for obviously political reasons to cover up wrongdoing or alleged wrongdoing reminds people that that kind of thing goes on at much lower levels as well. If you don't have civil service protections, if you don't have the protection of a union contract.
The VA bill is being spun as a way to better protect military veterans, but the not-so-hidden extra agenda in this bill is an attack on VA workers and their due process grievance rights when it comes to firing or other workplace discipline.
The House firing bill for VA workers took away collective bargaining rights altogether. It explicitly prohibited anybody's ability to use the grievance and arbitration provisions of their collective bargaining agreement to appeal a demotion, a suspension, a firing. That came through the administration.
AFGE President David Cox Sr. is testifying before Congress Wednesday on what his union is calling the VA firing bill.
Let's be smart on crime, because just being tough on crime isn't always the right decision.
Former Utah U.S. Attorney Brett Tolman says new orders from Trump's Attorney General Jeff Sessions telling federal prosecutors to seek the harshest possible charges ignores decades of criminal justice learning in the U.S. Among the lessons learned that apparently have escaped Sessions is that warehousing huge numbers of people in prison for long, harsh sentences isn't the most effective way of fighting crime. And Tolman says the Sessions order tightening the harsh sentence screws for federal crimes will increase the racial inequality in the U.S. criminal justice system.
While it affects all cross-sections of the United States, it has a deeper and a wider effect on our inner cities, in our poor, and in our minority communities. It ignores decades of learning that we've done on the issue. We have seen that you cannot prosecute and incarcerate our way out of the drug problem.
Brought to you by Union Active, your certified iOS and Android mobile app developer, offering high-quality, union-made mobile apps backed by a support team which upgrades your product to every new mobile operating system. Features, pricing, and examples are online at unionactive.com.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Your proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Still kind of stuck on the Trump defense of, channeling Richard Nixon and the if the president does it, then it is not illegal frame. And again, I go back to McMaster's thrown under the bus. I can't believe anybody wants to be in this administration at this point. I think people should be running for the hills. Anyway, here to talk about the developments of the last couple of days. Treason, Russiagate, the whole nine yards. I've got Andrea Chalupa. She's a journalist and author of Orwell and The Refugees, the untold story of Animal Farm. Andrea, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you so much, Rick.
So crazy, fun, entertaining, outrageous, ridiculous, destructive. Any other words I'm missing?
Roller coaster, Canadian passport. I don't know. There's a lot of words that come to mind right now.
And I got to be honest, as I've been saying, I predicted a lot of bad to come out of this administration. Not this bad. I mean, honestly, I really never thought it was going to be this bad.
You're absolutely right. It actually surpasses the satires of what a Trump administration would have been like. During 2016, when they were making fun of a Trump presidency, like this surpasses even what SNL could have imagined.
So you had during the campaign, and I can't emphasize this enough, you had the Trump people, you had him, you had Rience, you had Paul Ryan, you had the whole troop out there yelling about Hillary and the emails, and she should be locked up, and all of this stuff because she mishandled classified information through email or something, yet he's leaking it directly to Russian spies, and that's okay. I'm struggling with that.
Right. It's no wonder that the Russians look so happy inside the Oval Office. This obviously makes their job a lot easier. Yes. So Trump is a prize for the Kremlin on so many levels. It's not only the fact that he's such an easy mark, and any information they need, they know that they can rely on him, Bannon, that inner circle, that pro-Kremlin inner circle inside the Oval Office to sort of, if not get it directly, the names of sources, what the allies are really saying to the U.S., et cetera, they could at least, sort of pry it out, sort of get hints of it. So it's not just a concern about the silver platter leaks that Trump is handing over to a hostile regime. It's the fact that they can get anything they want out of this guy now, essentially.
And he thinks he's outsmarted them. That's the beautiful part of it. I mean, I truly believe he thinks he's outsmarting them.
Yeah, I think also he's just been clearly under so much stress, and there's persistent rumors of dementia that he's under. I mean, he is quite old, and who knows what he might be. He's quite an old president, so who knows what he might be under. You have been hearing this persistent dementia rumor. So I think I honestly think, from a human nature standpoint, he also was still relieved to be around friendly company. And he let himself relax and just sort of start spewing things to impress them and finally be around people who accepted him.
So that's all it's going to take. Just be nice to him. Give him ice cream.
Right.
Like my great-grandfather. Just give him ice cream. That'll make him happy.
Exactly right.
Give you anything you want. Wow. That's running our country.
Right. A child.
Oh, geez. Because here's the weird thing. And we live in this era where we have alternative facts, where you've got an administration who, as my grandfather would say, would lie when the truth would be better. We're in this weird world of where truth doesn't matter, which is why, I see that you are part of organizing this March for Truth. Tell me about it.
Right. Yeah. So March for Truth, the original idea came from Justin Hendricks. He's been calling for this on Twitter for months. We should have listened to him sooner. The whole movement sort of finally took off when Tim Mack wrote this great piece in the Daily Beast revealing that the Senate investigation into Russiagate was understaffed and also didn't have staff that had the right expertise to handle such a wide-reaching investigation. So that was really infuriating because, as we're also so used to the House side being kind of like a high school cafeteria, we as Americans put our hope in the adults on the Senate side. And then to find out that the Senate investigation was lacking, it was just too much. So a group of us got together. Jordan Uhl, who is a prolific viral Twitterer, who's also launching up a great new site called The Opposition. He and I joined forces with Justin Hendricks and just said on Twitter, hey, everyone, enough is enough already. Come join us on June 3rd, wherever you are, to march to show Republicans that they need to stop enabling this man who's totally unfit for office, who is putting our domestic and foreign security at risk blatantly. It's time to stand up to the GOP,
yep,
who is allowing this to happen. And the most amazing thing then occurred. We started getting calls and emails from across the country. And right now we have over 70 marches nationwide organized for June 3rd for March for Truth. from Anchorage, Alaska, to Orlando, Florida, and many dozens and dozens of cities in between. And more exciting news is that we've signed on some really strong superstar partners, the Indivisible Movement, MoveOn.org, Rock the Vote, the Town Hall Project, and others. And so this is really a time for us to really get into the streets and take back our country, because Republicans, for whatever reason, are unwilling to do it. And they're the party that's in power right now who has the power to stand up to Trump.
Yeah, I've been saying for a while.
Anyone in government.
I've been saying for a while it's going to have to be the Republicans who saved this country. They're going to have to take their party back somewhere near the sanity line because, as you pointed out, they're in power. But here's the thing. I think for so long they've been in the world of alternative facts and our team, sport mentality, that I got to be honest, it seems like a heavy lift.
Right. You also have to wonder, why are Republicans just issuing statements of concern when we're way past concern? Like, we need to start talking about impeachment as soon as possible. Like, we can't, if we're at this point in just the first 100 days, where will we be in the next 100 days, 2 years from now? Literally, lives are at risk, not only here in the U.S. but around the world. And given our our influence and all the funding we have for much needed programs and NGOs, et cetera, and the wars that we can get pulled into, and the fact that he has a nuclear code that can go on. But so it's like, when is it going to be enough for the GOP to finally stand up and save countless lives by removing this unfit man from office? So I think the question that all journalists should be digging into right now is, why is the GOP acting so impotent?
And it's a question that I've been asking for a while, because is it that the Russians hacked their stuff and there's a bunch of information there? There's so many scenarios. Or is it just, look, it's we won, it's our turn, and we're going to push through all of our agenda? Because look, while we're talking about the distractions, while we're talking about Trump and treason and Comey and you name it, all of this horrible legislation is going through, all of this horrible, these executive orders, all of this stuff is really ramping up without anyone really paying attention.
Yeah, that's a very good point. The GOP with its inhumane agenda, with Paul Ryan being excited about keeping people off their health care, they're acting like kids in a candy shop, like pigs at the trough. It's like they finally have their chance, and they're just being very greedy and just grabbing what they can. It's like they're pillaging the country. So I think it's quite frightening, and greed, as we know, is something that's very difficult to curb. It's like an addiction. So I think it could be a combination of both. It's simply that they're really excited, they're acting in their own interests, they're finally paying back their donors with all these horrible promises that the Americans, us, that we have to endure or suffer under, with having rape being a pre-existing condition, for instance, in this Trump care plan, et cetera. So I think that's definitely a possibility. But on top of that, we do have to consider the way, thanks to Citizens United, there's loopholes that allow dark money to be funneled to any political campaign. And I think that's very dangerous. It's very difficult for reporters to sort of track that. You really need to have money laundering experience, election systems experience, campaign law experience, et cetera, to really sort of pin that down and trace it back to any of these Republicans in office who are slowing down and in some cases obstructing the Russiagate investigation.
Yeah, I'm of the mindset you start by impeaching Trump and you work your way all the way through our government, and anyone who's beholden to Russia, anyone who's on the Russian dole, they should go too.
Absolutely, and the thing we all have to keep in mind is take stock of everything that we know that's been revealed with the Washington Post, the New York Times, and others. Take stock of what we know. Now imagine what we don't know.
Exactly. That's the scary part. Because this has been a fairly secretive administration. Again, they don't want to do press conferences, and I'm guessing press conferences at some point will be a thing of the past. But, I go back to something I talked about earlier. You had the spokesperson for the Russian foreign minister saying, you can't believe anything that American newspapers print. You can use them. Don't read American newspapers. Use them for other things because they're dangerous. And I go, yeah, the truth is dangerous. When you're putting out what's actually happening and it's not good, that can be dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, the Kellyanne Conway of the Kremlin, she really makes Kellyanne Conway, in fact, look like an amateur. But so, of course, a free press is dangerous to the Kremlin. That's why Putin has gone above and beyond to pass laws to really restrict press freedoms inside Russia. And, it's really scary when you have Donald Trump calling the press in America an enemy of the state. And you sort of wonder, like, how soon before there's certain crackdowns here happening. I mean, given where we are at day 100, it's not far-fetched to start sort of considering those other scenarios. I mean, I predicted that Comey was going to be fired. The morning when that piece in ProPublica ran about Comey misquoting the numbers of emails or something he got wrong with Hillary's email investigation, I put on Twitter that morning saying, this looks weird for Comey, a man who, is known for a lot of things, but especially transparency. That's very odd for him to get this number wrong. I mean, this looks like a setup for Comey to be fired. And then a few hours later, he was. So I had been telling people in conversation that, think about the worst case scenario. They're going to fire Comey. And people would look at me as like, that's crazy. That would never happen. That would be the end of the world. And now we're already at that point where Comey is gone.
Yeah. And the thing is, I don't think people understand just how historic that is. It's never happened in the history of this country where someone wasn't fired without cause. And now Bill Clinton fired the FBI director, but that was for cause. He was misappropriating resources. That's actually a fireable offense. This was, well, you asked for more money to investigate me, you're fired. And the thing that bothers me is he didn't even do it in the theatrical way that I thought, the pitch man on TV would have done. He did it kind of in a backdoor way that I guess Comey found out from television somewhere.
Right. He was in Los Angeles talking to an FBI staff, and the television behind him was showing that he had been fired. And people, pointed it out to him, and he thought it was first a joke, and then he turns around and sees the TVs reporting it. And then he had to excuse himself from the meeting and take a call to figure out what was going on. And I think, for anyone to learn that way, especially when you're one of the key people who holds the fate of the nation in your hands, I think that must have been quite an experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's no way to run a government. But, I got to be honest, the Kremlin has got to be laughing like crazy at just how chaotic we are.
Oh, I mean, the U.S. dollar is taking a hit. You have China coming in. We've always sort of anticipated the Chinese century coming, but now, with an unstable and unreliable and risky and possibly destructive U.S., this really ushers in the Chinese century. And so it's just this is what the Kremlin wanted. They wanted to get rid of a United States government that funded pesky NGOs and funded independent media grants and organizations in Russia and Ukraine and neighboring countries. They wanted to get rid of that sort of, how we stood for democracies and values. And now you have Rex Tillerson, who received a friendship, medal of friendship, order of friendship from a medal from Putin himself, now saying that U.S. foreign policy is divorced from values. And
Jeez.
That's music to Putin's ears.
Oh, my goodness.
So,
just crazy.
Yes.
Just absolutely crazy. And you look at the report that came out today, Israeli intelligence officials have said that, the U.S. intelligence people are telling them, don't share anything with us. Don't tell Trump anything because it's just going to get back to the Russians. And everyone knows if it gets to the Russians, it gets to the Iranians. So you're putting massive wedges between our allies. It's nothing good here.
No, absolutely. And the thing is that we have wonderful allies in the UK, France, Australia, et cetera, in Germany, et cetera. And, their intel communities are linked together in a union that helps support each other. And that includes the U.S. I don't know if it's going to include the U.S. much longer. I think our allies certainly feel vulnerable to being infiltrated by spies in the U.S. community who may have been flipped or, placed there to infiltrate. So I think it's a very dangerous time. I think it's essentially a spy war between the U.S. and our allies. And I think any intelligence community abroad that would try to help us would do what they could to help us by sharing, urgent intel, leaking urgent intel, but also start doing it cautiously, because no one knows who's really in charge of the United States government when you have an unfit president and a dominant Republican Party unwilling to stand up to him. So I think, again, as much as intel communities want to help us, I think they must be doing it now at this point a bit cautiously.
I know I certainly would be. So last question I got for you. What do people do outside of going to marchfortruth.info, and we'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Andrea Chalupa's name, take you right there. Outside of, signing up for that, getting to the march, what should we be doing, to kind of push forward this idea of we got to get these people out of here?
Okay, the number one thing is, when you have this sort of creeping tremors of authoritarianism, don't be defeated, don't be tired. You have to find some sort of spiritual center in your life. That's first and foremost, because what they want is for you to become cynical and to check out and just live your life and not be involved in the political system. When you do that, they win. So find whatever it is in your life. It could be anything that gives you the energy to keep going. Find that person who you fight for, and just show up. Show up to protest. Being counted there on the ground in a demonstration matters. Bodies matter. You have to show up and be counted for, especially, with everything at stake. Pay attention. Curate your list of, brave, fearless activists and journalists on Twitter so you can, put your finger on the pulse of what's going on, what might be coming up next. The other thing is pay attention to campaigns that are want to boycott Fox News, which has been planting the seeds for this whole right-wing takeover for many years, as we know. So I know that there's a lot of growing interest now to, there's a group that I'm talking to now about looking into boycotting Fox. So that's something that you most definitely pay attention to and join, and show up to vote and run for office. Just don't check out, because that's what they want you to do.
Yeah. This kind of reminding me of the Bush years. If you check out, the terrorists will win.
The terrorist being George W. Bush, of course.
No, I mean, being Donald Trump right now. And Reince and Bannon and the whole cabal of crazy. Just scary, scary times. Andrea, I appreciate you taking some time for us. I'd love to have you back as the insanity ensues.
Right. Well, I'll see you next week or so, which will feel like another year.
Great. I look forward to it. Andrea Chalupa. You want to check out her website, andreachalupa.com. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com, but also marchfortruth.info. That's where you want to go. You want to check out the June 3rd march. And if there's not one in your area, hey, maybe contact them and start one of your own. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Sanity for a change. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1979. That was the day we lost one of the giants of the U.S. labor movement, A. Philip Randolph. A. Philip Randolph spent his life working for black workers and the cause of labor. He organized the first national black union to be recognized by the American Federation of Labor, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. The fight for union recognition took 12 years, and the porters signed their first contract in 1937. Randolph went on to lead the effort to desegregate war industries and armed services during and after World War II. He was one of the leading organizers of the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, one of the most memorable actions of the Civil Rights Movement. He also worked tirelessly to break down discrimination within the labor movement. He was elected the first black vice president of the AFL-CIO in 1955. Randolph's dedication to the cause of labor was summed up when he said, quote, "The essence of trade unionism is social uplift. The labor movement has been the haven for the dispossessed, the despised, the neglected, the downtrodden, the poor." But Randolph also consistently declared that no movement for social justice can be complete unless it is also inclusive. While organizing for the desegregation of the war industries during World War II, Phillips argued, quote, "Equality is the heart and essence of democracy, freedom and justice, equality of opportunity in industry, in labor unions, schools and colleges, government, politics, and before the law. There must be no dual standard of justice, no dual rights, privileges, duties, or responsibilities of citizenship. No dual forms of freedom." Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
Bringing sanity and rational thought back to America. Rick Smith.
So here's while we're focused on all of the craziness, the insanity, and the fun and hijinks of the Trump administration, the Republicans passed they voted to slash hundreds of billions of dollars from the social safety net. Those programs that feed, poor kids, that education assistance for low-income families, Meals on Wheels, all of those things to help those people, us, all so that we can, basically have the Republican Party align themselves with the Trump spending plan without raising revenue. Now, understand, the horrible health care act that they've come up with, major tax cuts for the wealthy folks in this country. If you're at the top of the economic scale, good for you. You bought the best government money. Well, I shouldn't say that. You've bought a dysfunctional government, but at least one that works in your favor. And what we're doing is we're basically massively redistributing wealth from poor and working class people upward to the 1%. And, I would argue causing people to die much sooner, which, again, I'm certain that a number of our Republican friends would be A-okay with. Because you hear it in their language. Paul Labrador, the congressman from Idaho, said, people don't die from lack of health care. They don't die from that here in this country. And I'm going, what world do you live in? And, he lives in a very sheltered world, one where billionaires rain money upon his head. So I look at this, and again, while we're focused on what rightly we should be, the treasonous activities of this administration, and all of the insanity and the uncertainty and all of the imbalance. While we're focused on that, there's real stuff happening to real people. And, these cuts are dangerous. These cuts are harmful. They're going to destroy communities. And oddly enough, I would argue they're going to harm the Trump supporting communities the most, because the rural communities in this country, I don't know if you know it, they're folks who are struggling too. And when you pass the horrible Health Care Act that's going to defund health insurance for a lot of these rural folks, you're going to see those rural hospitals go by the wayside. And there'll be nothing. In fact, in Pennsylvania, the county that voted overwhelmingly, the highest vote total for Donald Trump was Perry County. Something like 78% of the people in the county voted for Trump. They don't actually have a hospital in the county. A hospital system was kind of set up because of the ACA, because now people finally had insurance that they could then go and get some care. So there were clinics and some things set up. But before that, there was nothing. So when the ACA gets ripped from these people, and they go back to not having anything, all of that infrastructure is going to collapse. And you got to go, did you not think of that when you overwhelmingly voted for the crazy orange guy? I mean, at some point, really, got to think this stuff through. Just nuts, bizarre, and scary. This is why we've got to stay active, involved. Look, I'm one who, I'll be honest, there's a couple of moments where you go, wow, this is just, wow, too much too soon. And you want to go and put it aside, because during the Obama years, look, there were weeks where I'd go, I wouldn't even talk about anything that came out of Washington. We'd be focusing on local stuff, or we'd be focusing on other stuff. There were weeks where we didn't talk about anything with Obama. There hasn't been a day on this show since Trump has taken office that we haven't focused almost entirely on how crazy this administration is. That's unhealthy. It's unhealthy for the country. It's unhealthy for our democracy. And it's unhealthy for the economy. And we're going to be paying hugely for it. Anyway, when we come back, going to talk about it's infrastructure week. One of the things I do agree with Trump on is we do need to rebuild the infrastructure. I just don't think he's going to get anything done, but we need to be pushing. When we come back, we're going to talk with someone from the AFL-CIO about why infrastructure, why now, why we need it, all of that. Quick break.
We shake the best house from the basement. Our government got raised. We ready to stand still. This is the fading American dream. I've got no time now to go and cry now. Before I take a job, don't want to go for. I'm just searching for my dignity. This is a fading American dream. This is a fading American dream. This is a fading American dream.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Comandante Trump, El Jefe, the gringo strongman. That's the image our current commander-in-chief seems to be cultivating. He has surrounded himself with generals, cavalierly threatened war with all bad hombres, drastically bulked up military spending, and imperiously slapped foreign leaders, people, and nations with demeaning tweets and public rants. Posing as Patton on the Potomac, Trump is out to make America feared again. How's that working out? Look south to Mexico. Our bellicose president has repeatedly blasted Mexicans as marauding thieves, murderers, and rapists. Adding injury to insult, Trump pledged to seal off Mexico by building an 1,800-mile-long, 30-foot-high, big, beautiful wall. But the big man and his big wall are crumbling in the face of reality. Start with the cost. $21.6 billion. The congressional leaders of Trump's own party couldn't choke down a number that big, so the interim budget agreement they passed in April provided exactly $0 to start building his wall. Then there's the reality of illegal entry into our country. First, 2/3 of undocumented people living here enter legally, zipping through customs with a valid visa. Then, when their visa expires, they just stay here. No wall will affect this big majority of immigrants. They would walk through or fly over Trump's massive monument to futility. Second, these days, most people crossing the Mexican border illegally are not Mexican, but Central Americans, especially children, fleeing gangs that are routinely kidnapping, raping, and murdering kids. Further, the fastest growth in illegal immigration is not from Latinos, but from Asian nations. This is Jim Hightower saying, far from making America feared, much less great, Trump's foolish belligerence is making him a global laughingstock.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Rebuilding America. The Rick Smith Show.
The walls come tumbling down. The walls come crumbling, crumbling. The walls come tumbling down.
So 73% of Americans say that they want the federal government to get to work rebuilding our country's infrastructure, which honestly leads me to wonder what the other 27% were thinking. Were they going, hell yeah, I want crumbling roads and bridges? Yeah, I want to pray that we get to the other side of the bridge. And yeah, I want to get my car aligned every 3 to 6 months. Yeah, I want that. The sign of prosperity are giant potholes and craters in the middle of the road. I haven't found that guy, but I can't imagine what 27% of the people going, no, I don't think we need that. I can't imagine what they're thinking. Anyway, welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. It is Infrastructure Week, the time where we spend a little thought on those potholes, those crumbling bridges, but also more the weak broadband access, our airports, our ports, you name it, our infrastructure, what makes us us. And here to talk about how we rebuild that, how we come up to snuff, I've asked Tom Trotter to come talk with us, Legislative Affairs Representative for the AFL-CIO. Tom, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, good morning, Rick. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So the American Society of Civil Engineers says we need about $4.6 trillion by 2025 to bring our infrastructure up to good repair. Yet the Trump administration saying they're gonna gimmick up about $1 trillion. The math doesn't seem to work for me.
Well, where to start here? Yeah, I mean, 4.6 trillion is a huge number, of course, and it's they put out the Society of Civil Engineers puts out their report card every 4 years, and they just came out with it a couple of months ago. And then the number keeps growing, and the number keeps growing because we keep neglecting and delaying doing something about it. They also gave out a grade to the country across the spectrum of 16 different categories on infrastructure, a D+. Not something that you'd be very proud of. In Pennsylvania, I know you spend time there, Rick. But you mentioned the bridges. Pennsylvania has got a lot of bridges, obviously, because there's a lot of rivers. But of the 22,000 bridges you have in Pennsylvania, 1 in 4 at this point is structurally deficient. And so, there's a lot of work to be done.
Yep.
So the Trump administration has floated a skeleton of an idea. It keeps changing a little bit on how they plan on doing that. But a lot of the first thing that came out, the first one they floated out was, it seemed to us to be a lot of Wall Street giveaways, and what we need is serious, real investment, not smoke and mirrors. Moving things around, giving tax breaks or tax cuts to, Wall Street and that. So, I mean, what we want to see, look, this is an opportunity to put people to work and create good jobs, and we want to make sure that we're following high road labor standards. That
Certainly.
But
here's the thing, Tom. What I didn't want to see is the first plan I called, basically payday lending for infrastructure.
Yeah, right.
We were going to set up a scheme where Wall Street was going to make a ton of profit, and we were going to foot the bill, and then they were going to get to own our infrastructure. It's my view, Tom, that, look, we need roads, we need bridges, we need a lot better internet access if the future is the internet. We need ports for ships coming in and out. We need airports that are going to bigger planes. We need all this stuff. We need waterways that is lead-free. We need all of these things. So if we need them, we should fund them so we benefit from them, so we don't have to pay a profiteer for doing it for us.
Amen. I couldn't say it better. I mean, you're right. They see pots of money like that, and they start sniffing around and get their fingers on it. And that, it's again not moving the ball forward. It's just rewarding those who just skimming out off the system. And you went through a whole list of things there that are needed. Yeah, you're right. We got ports that can't handle post-Panamax ships. We got people driving on. There's a cost for inaction here. Nobody wants to pay more taxes, myself included. But we haven't raised the user fee, gas tax, since 1993. It means that you get your car on the road. Yeah, it takes maintenance and updating, and you pay a little bit on there. We haven't done that since 1993. But what we are paying, and I know the D.C. numbers, but in lack of inaction also costs us a lot of money.
Yep.
So right now in D.C., the average motorist spends over $1,000 a year wasted in time, gas, and car damage. The average citizen in America, the average is 52 hours of each year just sitting around when you could be spending time with your family, being home relaxing. Maybe if you want to work an extra job, that's over a whole week's worth of work. You're just doing nothing, and those numbers continue to grow and getting us nowhere except deeper in the hole on our investments for moving things forward.
Maybe that's where the other 27% thought. They don't. Maybe there's nobody at home. Maybe they don't want to go home. Maybe they like sitting in traffic.
Well, there are better people than I don't like it one bit. Yeah, I mean, we're talking big numbers, and although Trump put out $1 trillion, that is the right scale. It's just how we do it,
right.
And we wanted to do it the right way. That not only creates good jobs, but stimulates economic growth, makes us competitive again, and for all the citizens out there and your listeners, it raises our quality of life. So we're not sitting in traffic, smelling fumes, wasting gas. We're doing things we want to do.
But here's the thing, Tom, and we know this. This is fact, or at least this is what we're told. The public sector can't do these things. We need the private sector. We need them, their expertise, their cost cutting. We need them. We can't do anything without the private sector and Wall Street because we're just not capable.
Well, that's just for those who want to line their pockets a little bit more. I mean, look, there are some instances where private investment can help around the edges, and it's been done. If it's done right, it works. There's been a lot of examples where it hasn't worked right. But you're talking about 7% of all projects out there maybe can be done that way. The rest of them can't. And so, what do you want to cherry pick all these things that can raise enough revenue to pay back these investors? And what about the rest of America? What about rural America, where you don't have enough traffic going through to put a toll on the bridge to pay for it for the long haul? It just doesn't work.
But here's the thing. Here's the reality. You're just going to build a bridge to nowhere, Tom, and we don't need bridges to nowhere.
You don't.
We need those. Look. I'm in favor of building bridges, and I'm in favor of the bridge to nowhere because eventually that leads to somewhere. It's those kind of. I live in a rural area. If it weren't for the electrification acts and the Truman era putting telephone wires out here, we'd probably still not have any of that stuff. If you're not going to take the time to invest and develop areas, you're missing a huge part of economy, especially for those areas.
Right. And I think you hit it on the head. Look, our forefathers, grandparents' generation and prior, they stepped up to the plate. They invested in the electrical grid, the interstate highway system, all these things that made our country great, created good jobs, grew the middle class, and made us a leader in the world. Now, unfortunately, we've been coasting on that because, Congress has been kicking the can down the road for the most part. And, we need to have transformative infrastructure like we did post-World War II for the 21st century, so people can have, if they're working in rural, they can get good broadband and do things. They can get transportation from their house to where the jobs are. The list goes on how the benefits are and what that means for us as a country going forward.
See, but that's got to take visionary policy leaders and not people who are they're not people who are going to foam at the mouth when they hear tax increases and they just start foaming at the mouth like rabid dogs, which has really been our politics. And I'm curious. You've been doing this for a while, and I ask this question of a lot of people. When did transportation, when did infrastructure, when did, congressmen getting the roads paved, when did that become a partisan issue? I mean, I'm old enough to remember where it was nonpartisan. As my friend Bob Ney says, it was a yawn vote. You came in, everybody wants infrastructure, everybody wants the pork barrel projects to, make their local area better. When did it become this political football where, you've got the Republicans who've just drawn a line in the sand and everything is no because it's going to raise taxes. Any thoughts?
Well, there is. It depends on the committees you deal with up there, and you're right. Bridges are not Democrat or Republican bridges, nor are roads or ports or airports. Everybody uses them, and there was a time where we could pass this stuff more easily. It seems like the Republican leadership, though, when it gets down to paying for anything other than tax cuts, they don't want to do it. Even though there's bipartisan support for doing those things, it gets hung up when it comes to how we're going to pay for it.
Right.
And we're all paying the price for that, like I mentioned. Them not doing something doesn't mean it doesn't cost us more money. It's just spending it on the wrong things, wasting money.
Exactly. In fact, the American Society of Civil Engineers, in their 2016 Failure to Act report, they point out that the average American family loses somewhere around $3,400 of disposable income each year because of our crummy infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that includes leaky water that causes clean water that drives up your water bill. It includes the points I mentioned about wasting gas just idling in traffic or damage to your vehicle. If you look across the broad spectrum, it costs us a little bit more in almost every segment of our economy because we've been not doing what we should have been doing as a country, and Congress has not been doing as our elected representatives.
Yeah, so overwhelmingly, I mean, I look at the last series of elections we had, hundreds of billions of dollars of projects were approved through referendums and local votes. People are willing to pay for infrastructure. Like I said, 73% of Americans want the federal government to do something. How do we impress upon our elected leaders this will, this want, this need to have, safe roads, safe bridges, decent drinking water, reasonable ports, again, broadband access that doesn't have us competing with third world countries?
Right. Well, I mean, you mentioned Infrastructure Week. We kicked it off yesterday, and this is something where we have, Rich Trumka, president of the AFL-CIO, going in with Tom Donahue, president of the Chamber of Commerce, which is not your normal pairing of people you see, but we're basically saying the same thing, the members of Congress and the administration, and we've got 250 affiliate organizations this year signed up from across the board, hundreds of events around the country to try and put pressure and raise the awareness for the population, put pressure on Congress to, look, it's time to act, time to build. We've talked about it. Everybody out there in your listening area is aware of, they deal with it every day. But at some point, somebody's got to stand up and, get some kahunas and do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, this is about good jobs. But here's my problem. Yep. This is where you, as someone who works in organized labor, I'm sure will have some thoughts. One of the things that Republicans are pushing for, while these payday lending gimmicks for infrastructure, they're also trying the other tactic of stripping out decent wages, hours, and conditions by undoing prevailing wage laws, and I would argue undoing overtime laws and undoing all of the 20th century for working conditions.
Oh, it's true. They've been undoing the threads of the fabric that set the stage to create the middle class and provide good jobs. Prevailing wage, Davis-Bacon, Buy America. So that we're building the projects, we're sourcing the steel and other components and creating jobs by doing that. And then, on the operations side, once something's built, if it's a transit system, you have to have operators and maintenance on that too. And there are efforts underway to try and strip every little thread as they make the fabric that creates these good jobs. And it's something we fight on an ongoing basis for sure.
Yeah, in fact, I was just reading a story here this morning since you brought up our rail infrastructure that because of Chinese imports, it's heavily subsidized by the Chinese government, we could lose up to 65,000 jobs because the industry of making these railroad cars are going to go by the wayside.
Well, it's unfortunate that when a lot of other countries have a long-term industrial plan or a future plan at all, ours seems to be more driven by the next quarterly profits for whatever company is out there, and that puts us in this situation where it's whatever's the cheapest right now instead of what's best for us in the long term. We sacrifice that.
Crazy stuff, and this is why we need a more militant working class. Why we need labor to step forward and hammer on this stuff. And I appreciate you taking time for us. Last question I've got: what's the marching order? If people are listening to this, they want something to do, what do you tell them to do?
Well, as usual, the voters have the power in the end of the day, and to the extent you come across your member back in your district, write them, call them, meet them face to face, and tell them what you want, and tell them to stop delaying and act on when it comes to our roads, bridges, and our entire infrastructure, because we're the ones paying the price for the lack of action.
No, I keep saying though, it's probably the only thing that's going to change all this is if a congressman gets swallowed up by a sinkhole or falls off a bridge. But heaven forbid that happen, and I'm not advocating for that. But maybe that's what it takes. Tom, I appreciate you taking a little time for us. Great talking with you.
Yeah, you too, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Good stuff. Tom Trotter, Legislative Affairs Representative there with the AFL-CIO. Again, Infrastructure Week. Check out their website. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Time to talk.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
he will not be making an announcement regarding that agreement until after he returns from the G7.
Temporary reprieve for the planet. Trump postpones decision on Paris climate agreement.
If the wind were to pick up, that could circulate air down in that tunnel and release radioactive particles into the air.
Emergency declared at the most contaminated nuclear site in the nation. Majority of toxic Superfund sites located near low-income areas, plus a win for taxpayers and the climate as Republicans fail to repeal methane flaring rule.
All of those happy failures and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Comedians, what are some shows we might hear on Redneck NPR? Guy Branum.
Wait, don't tell me about climate change.
Points, very good.
This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, another startling reminder this week that, there is a downside to nuclear energy.
Yes, there is. The Department of Energy declared an emergency on Tuesday at the Hanford Nuclear Reservation in Washington state. That's 150 miles or so from Seattle, after a section of a sealed tunnel caved in that contained rail cars contaminated with nuclear waste. Officials say no radiation was released and no workers were injured or exposed at the federal Superfund site, which for decades manufactured plutonium for nuclear weapons. In an interview with local news, Tom Carpenter of watchdog group Hanford Challenge said the incident again raises concerns over the safety of the decades-long cleanup effort.
This is absolutely a huge warning to Hanford, to the federal officials who oversee that site, and to the state of Washington. There are bad things at Hanford that could blow up, that could contaminate the communities, be a three-state disaster.
And speaking of Superfund sites, there are about 1,400 abandoned, contaminated sites in the United States that are so polluted and so toxic that the federal government has assumed the cost and responsibility for cleaning them up. According to a new analysis from the Environmental Protection Agency, 70% of the country's most contaminated Superfund sites are located within a mile of low-income family housing. Bad news for marine life. Oxygen levels in the ocean are falling 2 to 3 times faster than predicted due to man-made global warming. Because warmer water can't hold as much dissolved oxygen as colder water, scientists predicted years ago that as oceans warm, the amount of oxygen in the oceans would drop, causing dead zones where marine life can't survive. Based on decades of ocean data, researchers at Georgia Tech conclude that dissolved oxygen in the ocean started dropping in the 1980s and appears to be unfolding about 2 to 3 times faster than previously predicted.
Well, that's not good.
No, it's not.
But at least they're not living inside a nuclear waste dump, so there's that, right?
Yeah. Meanwhile, the White House announced on Tuesday that President Trump will delay, again, a decision about whether to withdraw the United States from the historic United Nations Paris Climate Agreement signed by President Obama. On Tuesday, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer said Trump will wait until after the G7 meeting in late May to decide.
The president wants to continue to meet with his team, meet with not just the economic piece, but his environmental team, and come to a decision on what's the best interest of the United States using the expertise that surrounds him.
And by expertise, of course, he means lobbyists, corporations, and fossil fuel interests, I suppose.
Yes, he does. And those industry trade groups are heavily lobbying Trump to withdraw. But major American corporations like Google and major investors that control trillions of dollars in assets are urging Trump to remain in the accord. UN Environment Chief Eric Solheim warned Trump last week that the U.S. will lose jobs if it pulls out because China, India, and Europe will snap up the best power sector jobs in the future.
And even some companies like Exxon, yes, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson's old company Exxon, are encouraging him to stay in the agreement so that the U.S. has a seat at the table. Otherwise, the world is going to leave the U.S. behind.
Finally, some good news with a win for American taxpayers. Senate Republicans on Wednesday failed in their attempt to repeal an Obama-era regulation requiring the oil and gas industry to stop leaks and the flaring of harmful methane, a potent greenhouse gas from their operations on public lands. The industry lobbied heavily for repeal, but environmental groups said the rule was crucial to stop the industry from wasting the public's natural gas, costing taxpayers more than $300 million a year in lost royalties. That's enough to power about 5 million homes. 3 Republican senators joined Democrats in narrowly defeating the repeal.
And who were those Senate Republicans?
John McCain of Arizona, Lindsey Graham of South Carolina,
his buddy,
and Susan Collins of Maine.
Well, good for them. Glad they did the right thing for the moment, for one single vote. But I'll take it. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Don't forget you can download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, or iTunes. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide via the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
I think I got it right this time.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
People all over this world are getting organized to
So to highlight just how bad this administration is going to be for working people, and again, as we were talking with Tom Trotter about, the want to undo prevailing wage, the want to destroy maximum hour laws, the want to undo minimum wage laws, the want to undo safety and regulations that protect workers on the job. Just the Wild West of employment, taking us back to the good old days of the 80s and 90s, the 1880s and 90s. A story came out of California. Mother Jones reported that on May 5th, you had about 50 or more farm workers they don't actually know outside of Bakersfield, California, who were exposed to this highly toxic pesticide called chlorpyrifos. I'll get it right someday. But evidently the Obama folks wanted to do away with it. The Trump people came in and said, no, we're making this toxic pesticide. We're going to make it great again. And a month later, what you had is these more than 50 farm workers exposed to this. About half of them, it's being reported, had to get medical attention because they had, the vomiting and the nausea and the people passing out and just this horrible stuff. And again, the employers don't really care because the people, they're not real people anyway. And we need to spray this stuff on there. Never mind those people. What's interesting to me, though, is the news media in California is begging people who were exposed to this to get treatment because if left untreated, could get obviously worse. Now, a couple of things pop to mind. First, you go back to our assault on undocumented workers. Here are these people who have been exposed to a toxic chemical, and they're more afraid of being caught and detained or harassed or whatever than they are about their health. And you go, well, what do I care about that? Well, if you allow that to happen in any environment, it pulls everyone down. And it goes back to, and again, I keep going back to the old Knights of Labor saying an injury to one is an injury to all, or a concern to one is a concern of all. This is a concern to me because no worker should be subjected to this, because if one is, eventually we all will be. And I remember, not too long ago, we had talked about going and picking tobacco in North Carolina as kind of an experiment for a couple of days. And it didn't work out. But, as one of the guys said, look, what they do is they cover the tobacco with the chemicals inside, and then they force people to go work in that environment, a highly dangerous, toxic environment. But hey, what are they going to say? They're undocumented. If you don't like it, we'll just call ICE, and ICE will come in and get you. And in this era of Trump and ICE raids, do you think working conditions for undocumented workers is getting better or worse? And if it's getting worse, when does it affect you? When does it affect all of us? So this is highly troubling. But again, not surprising. Nothing really all that surprising about the policies this administration has pursued, especially when you talk about workers' rights. Anyway, if you've missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. Love to hear your thoughts. Any of these stories banging around, things we should be talking about, let me know. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Remember, you can get the podcast there at the website. Also get the app on your smartphone. Take the program on the go. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's coming like the tide of flood beneath the lunar